Neighborhood Snapshot. My name is Bob Sardelli. I am a member of the Leominster Historical Commission. Today we welcome back to LATV Mr. Keith Lauer, a resident of the city of Leominster for over 50 years, a true gentleman who for over half a century has contributed in so many ways to the community. Businessman, city council member, Leominster historian, Plastorian. Welcome back, Keith.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Keith. Now, the LATV audience should be wondering what the word Plastorian means, and we're going to find out in a moment. Today's program is really a spin-off from our previous visit at LATV with Keith, where one of the things we did was to show this book. It's Celluloid, Collector's Reference and Value Guide, and by Keith Lauer and Julie Robinson. And we'll talk about celluloid, which I learned today from Keith was the earliest form of plastics. I'm learning so much by doing these programs. Shows that I don't know a lot, too. I have a lot to learn. Keith, what is a Plastorian, please?
It's someone seriously interested in the history of plastics.
Now, if I were to, that word is, the origin of that word.
I think it came from the Greek or the Latin.
But you coined the word.
Plastorian?
Plastorian.
Yes.
Yes. And it's a combination of plastics and historian.
Correct.
And you are indeed a Plastorian. What is, now this is a very basic question, something we take for granted. The audience knows what it is. You and I, everyone know, we all know what plastic is, but what is plastic?
By definition, it's a material that can be molded.
A material that can be molded.
Correct.
Okay, and Leominster, the city of Leominster, is noted for plastics and has been referred to as the Pioneer Plastics City.
Correct.
And as one of the things you mentioned to me in our little conversation earlier, Leominster is the birthplace of modern plastics in this country. There were many firsts in Leominster, and maybe at some point we'll talk about some of this, or in the course of our conversation, some of the things we'll talk about may have been some of the firsts that occurred. Why Leominster? Why was Leominster so well suited and situated to the industries developing here?
Because the comb industry developed here, and there were many people working animal horn, and that was the original material, and then plastics followed along.
So the comb industry, those very ornate, many of the very ornate women's combs,
yes,
and some of the other early types of combs, but they weren't plastic. Plastic wasn't around. It was animal horn. And tell us something about where did these animal horns come from? Cattle horn.
Worcester was a center of many tanneries.
Leather tanneries, yes, Worcester, Mass.
The cattle came to Worcester, where they were slaughtered, and the hides were made into leather, and the horns were a byproduct, and they were brought to Leominster down at the Horn Supply.
The Horn and Supply at the corner of Graham and Central Street, where the new CVS store is.
Exactly.
Formerly Goodhue Enterprises, Joseph Goodhue's family.
Yes. And so it was easy to bring them from Worcester and to Horn and Supply.
And then they would be, whether they steamed them or...
They were boiled in oil or water, water being less expensive. But that softened the plastic, or the horns, early plastic. And after they were softened in the boiling oil or water, they were slit from the fine point down to the base of the horn and then opened up. And they were put in a chase, and that was, if you could visualize this table with nothing in the middle, and they would put the horns in after they were boiled in oil and slit. They were opened up so they were a flat sheet, and they would put one after another, and then they would press them to make them flat. And to make the horns in the chase flattened well, they would use wedges, and the wedges were driven, which would bring the things closer together. And the story goes, old Mr. Cook, I believe he was one of the founders of Tilton and Cook, was intently watching the process, and they would put a wooden wedge in there, and a workman would hit that wedge with a maul, a wood maul, and as he drove that wedge in tighter and tighter, and one of the cooks, the old Mr. Cook, was very intently watching it one day, and by some freak accident he was hit on the head with the maul, and that killed him.
Oh.
Rather tragic story.
An industrial accident.
Yes, it was. Yes.
We mentioned the Horn and Supply Company, where the horns from Worcester, the animal horns, came in. There was quite an odor associated with that industry, as a number of interviewees have mentioned, and it was something. I grew up in that neighborhood, and many people who lived in that neighborhood will remember in the summertime the Horn and Supply.
And I've heard stories of the rats around the building, and
because that was a biological product.
Yes,
and
yes.
The pith inside the horns.
Correct.
And I remember Jim Gardner was on the program, and he mentioned how a lot of the byproduct, I guess, was used as fertilizer, even, and it was
the shavings and chips.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So all precursor, though, to the plastics industry. Okay, let's get into the plastics industry. And just before we do, I came across this term, and Bakelite. And when I had interviewed Mr. Joseph Goodhue, he mentioned that was associated with the Horn and Supply Company. It was Bakelite. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Bakelite.
Bakelite.
Right.
Bakelite, which...
named after Bakeland,
okay,
who had something to do with it, yes.
And that really put, because the Horn and Supply, Joe's dad used to make machetes, and the handles of the machetes were made of horn.
Exactly.
And then when Bakelite came in, that put Joe's dad, and the Depression happened too, I guess, right in 29. And the people in South America who used the machetes, they preferred the Bakelite to the horn. But Bakelite, am I correct in calling that a type of plastic?
Yes.
It is. But let's get into...
It was a thermoset plastic.
Thermoset plastic, with heat. Yes. So heat was involved?
You couldn't heat it again and soften it.
Okay. One time just to heat it, and then it was... I've seen pieces of it, and it's very hard, and yes, you can put different colors to it. I think you can...
You could add
yes, colors to it. Now, I'm going to hold up this book, and you informed me, and as I said, I'm learning many things, that celluloid is the earliest form of plastic. What we call modern plastic is
synthetic, yes.
Synthetic
or
plastic.
Semi-synthetic.
Semi-synthetic. Yeah. And tell us something about like the celluloid. the plastics we have today that we use in our homes, do we use much celluloid today, or?
No.
No, okay.
These items are celluloid, and it was very flammable.
Okay.
Very flammable. So it went out of use partly because of that. It was dangerous.
Did the Viscaloid DuPont company, did they use celluloid in their process? They manufactured things out of celluloid. And you said it was very flammable, and I recall when Emil Brusso was here, who worked, another fine gentleman, and he worked for years and years and years and years at Viscaloid DuPont. It was explosive and flammable, and I remember my grandfather and my uncle is still alive. He's in his 90s and he's retired down to Florida, but they lived on what is now Marguerite Avenue. That was the homestead, and they would, I remember my uncle saying that sometimes they would be out on the lawn and they would, the building would explode down a Viscaloid, or there'd be an explosion. And weren't the buildings made to be explosion proof?
Yes, I think they were so designed that with an explosion, the roof would come up and then come back down, and the walls would not blow out.
Because of the celluloids being so flammable.
And many people said that these companies had, in many cases, their own fire department. And I've heard people say that we have such a fine fire department today with the equipment they have because there was a prevalence of fires and explosions with the early plastics industry. And it just kept growing.
Yes, and I can see the connection why we would need that, because the firemen would have to very, very quickly go to those manufacturing plants.
And you have some pictures of the old Viscaloid plant, and I've seen diagrams of the plant layout, and they had their own fire hydrants all scattered through there.
Right.
And I guess through the years, some of the layouts of that fire system were lost, and when they took the buildings down, they had a lot of flooding because
the piping in the water system for the hydrant system. Yes. Right. Yes. We'll show that picture in a while, and another picture too. Well, Keith, when can we say that the horn industry and comb making, when did it became, that was a thing of the past, and there was the plastics industry in Leominster? What would the time period be about? What would a date be?
The molding of plastics began in the early 1930s.
In the 1930s.
Right.
Plastic molding. And when we talk about, and plastic manufacture is still in molding and plastics products manufacture, it's still a very important industry in Leominster. But what were some of it wasn't solely plastics. There were so many other associated, people in Leominster were employed in some way or another connected with the plastics industry. Somebody in your own family, the machine tools, what was that connection?
Well, they were hand tools and hand-operated tools for the most part. And the tool companies were just peripheral to the plastics industry. And there were so many of them growing in Leominster as mold makers and tooling makers.
Right, the machine shops,
yes,
the mold makers,
shops.
the tool makers. So many people got there, and that very skilled trades, yes. And highly skilled, and in Leominster associated with the plastics industry. The production of plastics, people who made their living and still make their living molding, working on molding machines, the office employees of the businesses of the different firms.
The transportation industry, bringing raw materials in and shipping finished products out.
And in our little conversation earlier, you had said that Leominster was well situated for the growth of the industry from
Yes.
the railroad,
Yes.
the railroads, I guess the highways, but particularly from what are the steps? So what steps developed between the raw material, which would be the powder, plastic powder, and that's manufactured in various parts of the.
Most of them are petroleum-based.
Petroleum-based.
And they came from the south.
In the south, and they would be shipped up here in the form of.
Well, when we had Foster Grant here, they used to send tank cars into Leominster. You don't see many tank cars here now.
And what would those tank cars be filled with?
They would have the monomer coming from the south.
The monomer. Now, what is that? For my benefit and for other people who have a lot to learn, as I do.
That's a chemical composition that's used in the manufacture of the raw material.
So the monomer, would it be a liquid?
Yes.
It was a liquid. So actually some of the monomer came in, this liquid, in tank cars, and it was actually then made in Leominster into the powder?
Yes.
See, I wasn't.
Yes. And
now,
you used to see tank cars on the sidings down here, strings of them.
Yes.
And they were going to Foster Grant, and I believe probably up to Fitchburg to Great American Chemical.
And so the actual raw material, the monomer, came in liquid form, chemical, and then it was manufactured changed into the plastic powder.
Powder, as we called it.
Does any of that happen anymore in Leominster, or does just the powder come in?
No, I haven't seen any tank cars coming into Leominster.
So now train cars and maybe truck, I don't know, is the powder transported by truck today? And it's the actual solid powder?
Yes.
Okay.
And a lot of the powder comes in railroad cars, and it's transferred to truck and delivered to the various industries.
Yes. And then that is then processed into the various plastics products, molded and so on. I'm going to hold up now, and I don't want to shortchange any of the companies that have existed in Leominster and that still are in the plastics industry in Leominster, but I'm going to hold up pictures of two of the major plastics companies which have employed so many people in Leominster through the years. And these photos are Arthur Bedoin photographs. Mr. Bedoin was a pioneer aerial photographer, and he owned and operated airport sales in Leominster, and his fabulous collection of negatives and prints have come into the possession of the Leominster Historical Commission, and the LATV studio has been involved and is involved in the reproduction and the restoration of many of his collection. But this is the Viscaloid DuPont works, probably at its height, and down on Lancaster Street, Route 117, for those who are new to Leominster. And it was a gigantic, gigantic operation. Mr. Brousseau, Emil spoke about it and informed us about this company. But it was a huge, 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 huge plant, and now many of the buildings have been converted
to other uses. Yes.
I think building number 100 is still there.
There were reportedly 100 buildings on the property.
100 buildings, and at its height, how many people were? 2,000. 2,000 people in Leominster were employed at this plant. The Viscaloid DuPont Doyle Works.
Yes, it became DuPont in 1935.
1935, and there's a Doyle Field in Leominster, and there's Bernard Doyle, a former one of our former mayors, and Louise Doyle, his daughter, a wonderful lady, a philanthropist in Leominster. So what's the what did Bernard Doyle have to do with
Viscaloid? He was one of the founders.
One of the founders of Viscaloid, yes. And one of the early pioneers in the Leominster plastics industry.
Yes, he was.
In the 20s and 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and now at the other end of the town, on North Main Street in Leominster, we have another of the major plastics, plastic manufacturing concerns, and it's the Foster Grant Company. And this again is another of Arthur Bedoyne's aerial photographs. And for those of us who are new to Leominster, but who frequent the Water Tower Plaza and don't have, and for those new residents of Leominster who haven't the foggiest idea of why it's called Water Tower Plaza, longtime residents of Leominster know that there was the water tower there, and you can see it in the picture, the Foster Grant Water Tower, which was taken down not too many years ago. And there it is. And this is the Foster, with Foster and Grant, or Foster?
Foster and Grant.
Foster and Grant, and Mr. Joseph Foster, well-loved employer and a major manufacturer and employer in the city of Leominster for many years, and so many Leominster residents have worked there, and it provided employment for so many residents in Leominster. So, but again, Viscaloid, DuPont, Foster and Grant are only two of the many companies who have, in the plastics industry, who have contributed to Leominster, so much to Leominster, the city of Leominster. Now, Keith, these objects are not just for decoration on the table. They're, you brought part of your collection, your immense collection, really, a very extensive collection of plastics products. And please tell us something about these items, which are, by the way, you have in your book.
In my collection.
In your collection.
In the book, correct.
And by the way, this book is, I'm told, is available still on Amazon. I think it's on.
It may be, but publication ceased several years ago.
But I think it's still available. I know very little about Amazon.com other than it's an internet thing. That's another thing that I don't know a lot about.
I don't either.
Computers and the internet. Okay, tell us something, please, Keith, about some of these objects.
This is a Viscaloid product, and I think there are 7 colors in this duck or waterfowl, such as it is. Very nicely painted and decorated. And this was painted using spray masks, and they would mask off everything but the color they wanted to apply. And so, that was the way they were.
So there were a lot of steps then.
Oh, a lot.
That it was very labor, as you said before, it was labor intensive. Yeah. And where was the mold made in Leominster, or was the?
I presume it was. In 1935, I believe the molds were sold, and this is one of the original molds, as purchased by Great American Plastics.
Great American Plastics of Fitchburg.
And this is not celluloid. This is cellulose acetate, and the decoration in no way compares with the original.
The decoration on the original is much more elaborate. There are more colors.
Many more colors, and this was a pink, which was not the original color of the material. And so you have 1, 2, black for the eyes, probably 3 or 4 colors at the most. And it is made of cellulose acetate, not cellulose nitrate or celluloid.
Now, cellulose celluloid acetate, not celluloid nitrate.
Right.
Celluloid nitrate is the original?
The flammable.
Flammable one. This was non-flammable?
It would probably burn, but slowly.
Burn
This would
slowly.
burn rapidly.
Rapidly, okay.
And all of these animals were of the original cellulose nitrate.
All of these are the original type of celluloid.
Yes.
Okay. What are now? I see a donkey.
Yes.
Now, it must have been, well, how, were those molded?
I think the ears were molded and cemented on. And
Okay.
The horns on the ram were molded and cemented on, the same way with the cow horns and the elephant tusks.
Okay, so the main body of, say, the donkey would be molded, and then there'd be a step, and then the ears would be molded separately, and then a worker would have to cement them on.
Correct.
The same thing with the ram, and you mentioned an interesting little anecdote about the dog.
I understand this St. Bernard dog was a favorite of Bernard Doyle's and also of the gentleman of the other plastic company prominent in Leominster. So that accounted for so many of these St. Bernard dogs. And these animals are all made in progression of sizes. And probably I have some animals about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of this type. And
up to that size.
there may have been 6 different sizes of the same creature. Same way with the cow. I have little cows about so high. And the elephants. I do have a box from the Viscaloid company. I think there were 12 little tiny elephants in the partitioned box. And the same way with the bears.
Now you mentioned the molds were sold in 1935 from Viscaloid.
Yes, when DuPont took over.
Okay.
In 1925, after a period of years, they said, well, we're in the chemicals, and we're not in the toy business.
Right, because these are all toys.
Yeah, that's
And-
right, or decorations.
Okay, so DuPont really had no need for
In about
those
35, I think they auctioned off a lot of the molds
molds to
make them, and a lot of them went to Great American Plastics.
Great American. Irwin Plastics.
Irwin Cohen.
Irwin Cohen. That's a name, a famous name and well-known name in Leominster.
Yes, and I got that information from Hayes and Howard, who went down there when they had the auction of the molds, and that's how Great American got into
Okay,
this.
and Great American located in Fitchburg
And Leominster.
and Leominster. And did they mainly make toys or items of that sort?
They made an awful lot of toys, but not, well, for a while they may have made some out of celluloid, but because of the flammability of the celluloid, they went to cellulose acetate.
Cellulose acetate. A question now, is cellulose, I have to look at cellulose acetate, is that used today? Is that in plastics today, or are there?
Oh yes.
It still is.
Yes. Cellulose butyrate. Butyrate could take a lot of shock, and that was used for screwdriver handles and chisel handles.
So what started out as celluloid has progressed through the years,
yes.
evolved, and is still used in plastics. But
Yes.
okay. The Great American Plastics, both in Leominster and in Fitchburg,
And later Nashua.
and in Nashua. And my uncle Harry, who Petronelli, who is still alive and down in Florida, and my uncle Raymond Petronelli, his brother. They both worked, I think, at Great American. Were associated with that company, and the Great American. Well, what about? I'm going back to DuPont and to Foster Grant. DuPont was noted for, I know they manufactured combs, toothbrushes. During the war, they made the bubbles, I guess, for the bombers. We have documentation on that. Mr. Angelo Gavita, whom I interviewed, his dad worked down at DuPont, and they were making that material during the war effort, during the Second World War.
They made windshield material.
Windshield material.
And they had a company that was a combination of Pittsburgh Plate Glass and DuPont, and it was called the DuPlate Corporation.
Okay.
And there was a plastic laminate between the two layers of glass.
So the Leominster plastics industry cooperated or helped in the war effort.
Oh yes.
Had a big pack. Can you? I know this is kind of unfair to you because we didn't talk about this before, but can you tell us something about that? The plastics industry in Leominster and the war effort.
Well, they had a lot to offer in the war effort. One thing was in plastic mines, and mines could not be detected if there was no metal components in the mine. And Victory Plastics in Hudson made an awful lot of anti-tank and anti-personnel mines out of plastic, which was fiber-filled, which would give it strength. And the mine detectors could not pick these up.
Couldn't pick it up, the metal detectors.
Yeah.
And the tool industry in Leominster, didn't it, some of it convert to the war effort?
Oh yes,
yeah,
and what was it? They flew the E on the banner, and those were prime suppliers of war effort.
Not just plastic things, but some of the machine
yes.
things, because I remember my dad was a machinist, very highly skilled, and I think that they even made a component, perhaps, or experimented with a component for a torpedo.
Quite probably.
You know, with the tool industry and the machinist, skilled
mortar
machinists.
fuses were made in Leominster.
Mortar fuses.
Yes, and they were very popular.
Getting back to peacetime, the Foster's and DuPont, Foster sunglasses, noted for its sunglasses, its so many other products, which people who worked at Foster Grant and at DuPont, Viscaloid DuPont, they're very familiar with those things. What were some of the other?
Well, Foster Grant was a vertical processor.
A vertical?
Because they had their own plants down in Louisiana, and their petroleum derivatives came up here by tank car. And so they were integrated right from the monomer production to the finished product.
And again, the monomer was the liquid chemical that would be brought up in the tank cars and then made into the powder or the material, the beads, whatever I call them, beads, that would then be ground up, granules, and then ground up and then melted and heated and
formed. Yes.
And thereby the plastic itself, as you said, getting back to what we said earlier, plastic is something that can be moldable.
I think it came from the Greek or Latin, meaning plastikos.
Okay. And again, there's the Plastorian. What are some of the other items? I see some little items here, Keith.
Oh, this is a pair made by Viscaloid. They're toothbrush holders, and they're favorites of mine, a boy and a girl, and you can identify the the age partially by the hairdo and the attire.
Yes.
But these were popular at one time. And if you went out to buy them today, you'd have to look a long time before you could find them. Also, in recognition of St. Patrick's Day, which is coming up,
yes.
This is a Japanese item. I favor the Leominster items, but this is called Paddy and the Pig, and the legs are movable, and it's a rather unique little piece. But with St. Patrick's Day coming, I thought I would bring that along. And this piece happened to be Japanese.
Now you mentioned Japanese. I know that in a previous interview you have traveled to Japan and Europe too. France.
Oh, you know.
And in connection with your interests in the plastics industry, could you tell us something about?
Well, the one in France was in Oyonnax, and it was a community surrounded by mountains, covered with boxwood trees, and their progress was in some periods parallel to Leominster. They were a comb maker too, and it was called Plastic Valley, and that's a very interesting place. I've been over there a couple of times. I left some of the small animals similar to these in the museum there. And
in France?
In France. And I did the same thing when I went to Japan and toured the plastics industries over there. And I left some of my smaller reproductions of these animals in Japan.
Which is so fitting that plastics products manufactured in Leominster have, where really it's birthplace of modern plastics in this country.
Yes.
So prominent in the development of plastics that a little bit of Leominster is someplace elsewhere in the world.
I planted a few of them in various museums. Yes. I thought Leominster should be represented.
And that's so true, and that's very fitting. What about some of your other experiences in Japan? And are there? Well, tell us a little bit about that. About what did you went over to Japan, and how did you communicate?
Well,
in France too.
I spoke through an interpreter to about 85 men in Japan, one woman, about the industry in this country, and compared it with theirs.
Now, were they? And at the time you went, when did you go to Japan? Approximately
Several years ago, in the early '90s, I guess. I was only over there for 8 days, but I was very well treated, and we traveled around by train in Japan, and I learned a lot about their processing. I have some movies made in Japanese plastic industry. I had them, but I was associated with the National Plastic Center Museum, and I was taking some of my things out the other day, and I have not found as yet those movies.
Those films.
And I certainly will search for them.
Earlier you had mentioned, and we mentioned that our country, Leominster, is the birthplace of modern plastics in this country, and it's the site, Leominster is the site of many firsts in the plastic industry. Can you tell us some of the firsts?
Well, I've been told by DuPont employees that it was used to some extent as an experimental factory, and testing the market and testing the production. Many of these early developments occurred at the Viscoloid Company, or the DuPont Viscoloid Company.
Yeah.
So it was Leominster produced many innovations, but they were tried here for production costs and so forth.
Right. And I think perhaps that word innovation is very appropriate to describe innovative, the plastics industry in Leominster, right from the Yankee pioneers with the comb industry. This part of the country in the early days, the Northeast, New England, the site of so much technology of that day, and then the Yankee innovation, Yankee ingenuity.
Leominster had a part in the development of the safety windshield, and they used to use celluloid as an interlayer, but exposure to the sun would cause it to yellow. And that was a joint operation at one time with the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, and it was called the DuPlate Corporation, partially DuPont and partially Pittsburgh Plate Glass.
Well, nearing the end of this interview, Keith, we mentioned the word innovation and innovative. Leominster still has a bright future in...
oh, certainly.
It certainly does.
And the personnel in Leominster is pretty well oriented towards plastic, and there's a good labor supply here of people experienced in plastics, and that's a valuable asset for the city.
It certainly is.
Yes.
It certainly is. Is there anything else, anything that you would like to mention, perhaps, before we conclude our interview today?
No, I have to look at my watch here. I see we're beginning to run out of time. But I've enjoyed my association with the industry, and particularly in the collection of items related to the industry. Not only this, but the product, but in the tooling and so forth. And molds were made in Leominster, and it was one of the pioneer mold-making communities. And I would say, we don't say die.
You corrected me earlier.
Never say die.
Never say die.
They're molds.
Because I was saying, you know, the tool and die industry, and you told me, never say die, they're molds.
Yes.
M-O-L-D-S.
For making plastic products.
For making plastics products.
Yes.
I
think dye is more applicable to the metal industry.
Okay. See, that's another thing I've learned today.
Yeah.
Well, Keith, I want to thank you very, very much for...
Well, it's been a pleasure to show these things I've been collecting for so long. The book was a pleasure. I had a co-author in the book, and Julie Robinson. And Julie was not a photographer, but when she got through, she was an accomplished photographer. And she's since written another book that's on the market. And as I look at the cover of this book, I see many things that I remember here. And this little girl was out in Brimfield in the flea market, and I bought some things from one dealer, and I said, that little girl had an alluring countenance, so I went back and bought it, and I was glad that I did. This was the giraffe, which I have here, which was made by Petticolin in France.
Yeah. I'll put that right there.
Yeah, and that was blow molded, much as these animals were molded. And here's a Kewpie doll. And I remember I bought this fan at the bird cage in Siesta Key, part of Sarasota, Florida. And I didn't design the cover. The publisher designs the cover from the items that I have. And they continued on the back. Here's a wild boar from Germany, a collie, a back comb, crib blanket anchors. These clips held the crib blanket onto the side of the crib. And, the crumb tray. And the publishers decided which items would be used on here. brush handles and mirror backs were another big plastic item. This is a bud vase in the darker colors.
Quite a variety of plastics products.
Yeah, and that was done by the publisher.
Beautiful.
Collector Books of Paducah, Kentucky.
Beautiful, beautiful book.
And it's out of print now.
But I think still available for those who are internet savvy. eBay, I guess eBay is the...
I believe one of your personnel here told me the last time that he got this book.
I think earlier in the interview I mentioned Amazon.com. Well, maybe I'm not being computer literate. eBay maybe is the proper term. But for those of you out in the LATV audience who know about such things, the book is still available if you search for it. Keith, I want to thank you very, very much again.
It's been my pleasure.
And for being our guest, an excellent, as I said, a real gentleman.
Well, thank you.
And as always, I want to thank Carl Pimarini, Jack Sully, Dennis Cormier, and Tina Pimarini, and as always, the LATV viewing audience. Thank you very much.